If we are to have a creative future known as the Aquarian Age, the yogis consider the Aquarian Age to be a renaissance. And the Aquarian Age began its transitional period around 1993 when Microsoft came out. And according to the yogis, the Aquarian Age will be officially being integrated into education or into economy, spirituality, religious in 2036. This renaissance is already gaining a momentum. We see it in our inventiveness, our innovation. We see it in our artistry. We see it in new forms of spirituality and new forms of creativity and self-expression. This is all paving way for the Aquarian Age. The Aquarian Age is considered the environmentalist and the humanitarian. And quite interesting, right now at this time, that is what we need at this time. We must heal our generations of trauma. We already have many generations on this planet who have emotional pain. We have many different emotional pain from different wars. Younger generations, older generations, not just US, we're talking about internationally. And it's very hard to have a clear head when you're dealing with emotional pain. Trauma is a great stealer of life force energy. Because when you are in that trauma, it takes a lot of energy to recover from that. Because with that trauma, with that emotional pain, comes rage, agitation, comes hormonal imbalance that can stem from any sort of aggression towards yourself. And all of that must be healed for us to really have a clear head. So a lot of us are fueled up by this emotional pain, and that can be from so many things. This emotional pain that we have, because we're dealing with some warlike behavior that we haven't successfully navigated through, and it just keeps piling up. It just keeps piling up. The generations that are here now, we know as the millennials, we know as the Gen Z, we know as the Gen Y, these very young generations on this planet are pioneering for a creative outlet that can really help them to better manage their anxiety or their emotional upset or their psychological imbalances. The younger generations are trying. And we have a lot of destructive habits, a lot of destructive ways about us. But what really keeps us moving is that creative future, is that renaissance, is that cultural relaxation, that cultural reform, and that cultural adjustment. When we think about World War III, in this friction Right? We've always had this friction going on, and that friction builds and becomes agitation, and then that becomes aggression, right? We know this. We've seen this again and again and again, right? It's the same formula: friction, agitation, aggression. Friction, agitation, aggression. Friction, agitation, aggression. We've seen that again and again, right? And we are still pulling we're making choices that are old, and we know that we're making choices that are old, and that's why we feel ashamed of ourselves, and that's why some nations feel ashamed of themselves for getting themselves in a situation that brought about a lot of trauma, not just to their own people, but just to their own sense of livelihood, to their own spiritual growth and spiritual maturity. And that's what an environmentalist is. That's what a humanitarian is spiritual maturity. And spiritual maturity, we don't look at that in politics. We're like, that don't mean anything. You control and you dominate, right? And that's the patriarchal sort of dynastic Egypt sort of ancient old method of getting a handle on things. But we're in a different time. We're in a technology age. We're not in the early 1900s, and we're not in the late 1900s. We're in a technology age. Our population is a lot bigger than any president of the USA has managed, right? We are, as U.S. citizens, we are very diverse. We have so many cultures intermingling with each other. And yet we don't have cultural depth. We don't. We don't have that cultural depth. And that's what we're trying to establish. We're trying to establish that where? Within community. Because community is the backbone of a nation. We look at the control and dominate the people. But really, when we look at the people and the people united in the millions, they're united by their culture, not their sense of I'm controlled or I'm controlling, I'm dominated or I'm dominating. It's their sense of culture. It's their sense of duty to their family. It's their sense of artistry that they want to preserve and they want to protect. And within that culture, that's where we spiritually grow. That's where we spiritually mature. But again, that emotional pain, when you got that emotional pain, right? And you got that friction, you got that agitation, you got that aggression. We are foolish by our own mental imbalances and our hormonal imbalances. We are fooled by our own sort of confusion. And that's what creativity, it offers us a voice of reason. It offers us a self-therapy we call a cool down. Right? A cool down. Because if we ask many nations or geographic regions on this planet about the things that went down, when they go in the cool down, when they, look at that in the life review of that, right, when there's some spiritual maturity that's going on, I'm sure many of them would have desired a new choice, to not continue an old choice, to keep that old choice still running, right, to kind of tame that old choice and then override that old choice with a new choice. So we are entering into Aquarian age. And it doesn't matter what culture we're from, right? This is sort of in a Vedic tradition, right? So again, we are getting very culturally intermingled, right? And that's what's helping us, guiding us towards more creative solution rather than mine is the best and no, mine is the best and no, mine is the best, and then wasting all your life force energy on figuring out who has the best religion or who has the best this or that, right? Very, very masculine, very aggressive, very patriarchal, but not very protective, right? Of the culture itself, right? So our spiritual growth is very much about the health and wellness of the community, right? So that is why we will not have a World War III, and that is why we will not be blowing ourselves up, right? Because we want to have a creative future. In the technology age, it's going very fast. And if we don't have a clear head, if we don't have a clear head because we're all kind of scrambled and all kind of intensified, the pressure, add more pressure because now we got more drama that's piling up, and we're just like, oh, right, I'm already dealing with this anxiety now, this drama. We're not going to be able to make it, and we know it. We know it. That's why we will never allow ourselves to get to that level because it's not these old choices that these friction, agitation, aggression that we did before, where we just monarchical days, we would just get emotionally triggered, and we would off with his head, let's go kill his family, knock him off the board, knock him off the chess game, but we can't do that nowadays. We can't just say, let's just knock them off, right? That's what we did in the monarch days. I'm just going to kill all their family, like, just be done with it. We can't do that because with these sort of nuclear bombs, right, we're talking about a major environmental damage. And we humans think that people can be thrown away, right? Genocides, all that kind of secretly, just think secretly, just like, nobody's gonna care. No one's gonna see. No one's gonna care. Like, just push them out. Like, what's the big deal, right? But when you're dealing with you cannot just damage the environment and just keep it moving, right? We understand that. With human beings, we don't understand that. That you can, you just throw them away and just keep it moving. We don't really understand the consequences of it, because if we did, we would find a new choice. We would have a new choice, and we would be more inclined to choose that new choice rather than keep the old choice going and then just keep the same formula that is very predictable, right? And that's why a lot of younger generations are already spinning in their head, right? If they already see the friction, they already see the agitation, they're already predicting aggression, because they know the formula because their parents have taught them, their grandparents taught their parents, great grandparents and ancestors going back, right? So we know it. But this Aquarian age, this technology is quite fascinating in the way that we are connected, right? I can reach out to somebody in Japan, or somebody in Australia. So that means that we have a huge library, right, of information and knowledge, right? And a lot of that is not surveillance, right, where you can put anything out, and that means there's a bulk of charlatan and misinformation, right? That's probably gaining a huge bulk of misinformation, but there's also a lot of credible information that has integrity, right? That is through the community, that has really refined, right, a culture around that wisdom that they've been preserving, right? So when we talk about new choices, because that's why we're healing, right? We want to heal, we want to recover, right? And unfortunately, a lot of generations did not recover, right? When we talk about the Vietnam vets, right? Many of them, I lived in Washington D.C. and you would see them just wandering around in the streets, and they were, a lot of them were known for that, right? And not just in Washington D.C., but and I'm sure in many cities, right? And not just Vietnam vets. I'm sure you have all kinds of people from all kinds of nations that are very much like the Vietnam vets, right? Or we talk about the baby boomers. The baby boomers came out of a trauma, right? Came out of a heavy period of trauma, right? And sorrow, right? So it is in our culture, right? And not just where we think culture as in like some tradition, like some old sort of life, some sort of lifestyle. It's like old, that's been tradition of the tradition. We're talking about us as the millennials, as the Gen Z, the Gen Y, regardless of what generation we're in, but we're definitely on a path of therapy, of well being, of healing, of finding balance, and finding a new choice, and getting your head clear, right? Out of the all of that sort of emotional pain that just has us raging, right, at just everyone and no one in a very sort of reactional but not a responsive way. Because responsive, we understand when we spiritually mature in our tribe, in our community, where we do have a voice of reason, that ma frequency, which is that mother, right? We understand that respond is being responsible, right? Not just, and that's where the humanitarian sort of energy, that humanitarian spirit or environmental spirit is coming into play. Because we don't understand that when we're dealing with, it's not just a ball, or not just what we call a hammer and a nail. When we're just, we could, we're not throwing rocks at each other's windows, setting flames to each other. This has to do with environmental sort of damage, that to be responsible is to understand that that is going to affect multiple regions. And we don't understand it affects multiple regions. And a part of us responding as civilians is to really come together in our creativity. Because in that sort of political game where everybody's wanting dominance and control, right, and doing that kind of whatever that is, right, as us as civilians, we can put a lot of life force energy towards creativity, towards innovation, towards artistry, towards invention, because that's what's going to give us a backbone, and that's what's going to give us an exchange of good tidings, good tidings, and also that's going to really build us up to be more well-rounded leaders, right? Well-rounded. I'm talking culturally well-rounded, not when we think of the United States, we always think of like some same kind of story of the presidential sort of dynamic, right? Well rounded and has like a cultural depth. But in order to have that cultural depth, to have that expansion of perspective, and the way that you can have that logical or that logical pathway, that linear pathway, or that patriarchal pathway, where you're very much in this historical, it is what it is, but also have that sort of expansion, because a lot that is documented in our history textbook is not there, right? When we look at our high school history textbook, we think of a lot of, I do think of the Holocaust. There's many pages on the Holocaust, right? And uh, there are none when I basically a paragraph, for example, on the Trail of Tears, right? Or many other wars or aggressions that have happened, but it's is not there. So we do need to expand. We do need to expand our idea of history, and that history is moving. It's not stagnant. It can't be rewritten. As we spiritually mature, our history does rewrite itself because our perspective begins to revolve. Our perspective becomes more inclusive of cultures that we denied and that we shamed and that we threw away before. And that's what's happening now. Our perspective is becoming more expansive because we're getting a clear head. And that's what's happening. These generations that are coming in, they are being brought into cultures or community of health and wellness, of creativity, of many forms of therapy, that on how to, self psychology, self hypnosis, recreational activities. People are really going deep into philosophy, or just forms of how can I move on from my emotional pain so that I'm no longer triggered into being reactive, into being ha 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 ha, like that monarchy sort of ha ha ha, that where everybody gets charged, but charged, that power energy of that stadium is so powerful, right? That's so much creative energy, and that ha ha given to a project of immense like creative or even environmental or agricultural or architectural sort of refinement, or artistic sort of involvement, or some sort of um, development that can bring about this greater beauty to the land. That is what we call the Aquarian age. Right? We get charged up, charged up into that emotional pain where there's something in this. We got those frictions. We get charged up by it. But a lot of times that charge gets up, but it doesn't. It's not used to its fullest potential. Not used at all in a potentiated anywhere that actually brings a sort of an empowerment to the individual in a sort of courageously respectful way towards not just the self, not just the brothers or the sisters or my color of skin and the people of my color of skin, or this is my nation, this is my religion, this is my spirituality, but to what it means to actually be an environmentalist, living in an environment that can be damaged. So Yogi Bhajan, right? Great, yogi. He predicted a World War III, but we have moved beyond that because he predicted World War III earlier, right? So we've passed the date that he's predicted, and we have done that, right? Because of our clear-headedness, right? With our clear-headedness, we're not so tempted into old habits or behaviors, right? Because we have a clear head, right? So we're not so easily tempted into alcoholism, especially if that's emotional pain that you carry for your lineage, or not so seduced into self-hate, or not so tempted into any form of aggression that can be anything really, because we have a clear head. And we gain a clear head through our spiritual practice of growing, right, of maturing. And we think that has no sort of structure, or that has no sort of discipline in how to order and gain the control. But really, that's what enriches the people and educates the people and gets the people to think independently and gets the people to really start to be innovative with their lives, so they're not at the mercy, so they're not feeling like they're lost, or feeling like they have to do deceptive things to get some sort of something from life, right? We need people who have independent mind. We need people who are educated, but not just educated in an institutional sort of right, wrong, this and that's not that, but in a more expanded way. We want them to be more expansive than our education system. We want them to be smarter than our education system, not obedient to educational system and then regurgitating that out and then keeping the same going. We need people who are even more expansive than our education system, because that means that they're gonna bring more well-roundedness, because this technology age, the doors are opening, and we're discovering that tradition meets science, and science is starting to reform tradition and starting to open up possibilities that we were too stubborn, or we denied, right? Science, right? Science and also community is opening up doors for us to look at ourselves in a new light, even in our voyage to space. Look at ourselves in a new light. But we understand that what we really do carry with us, either we're on this planet or we're trying to go to other planets, is we do carry our emotional and our spiritual maturity, because that is responsible, right? Because we are going to have emotional pain, and the crises is always going to be, right? But the way we respond to that is actually what's going to help us to relax, right? And to have a clear head, so that we don't feel shame, right? We don't feel shame because we made an old choice that was from a habit or behavior that maybe not be our own, but from our family lineage, or from our nation, or just from same repeat, right? And then we feel shame because we didn't evolve. We need to evolve, right? Nobody, shame is like same, it's like stagnant, it's like repeat, and it's like same, keep going, and not really feeling the grit of evolution. And that's what we really desire. And that's why we get so friction, agitation, aggression, because we really desire evolution, right? And sometimes we desire it too rapidly, and we know that leads to change and revolting, and that real, when you have a big revolt, when you have major evolution, major change, it sometimes has to happen because it's been delayed for way too long. When you get a big, you get a big reaction, right? When you get a big sort of change, you get a big reaction from that. And when you get a major change, the reaction can be, for us, it can be civil war, right? We've seen that. It's civil war. We got big sort of change that happens, and that happens very quickly. Revolution, and big reaction happens, right? So we are constantly desiring evolution, right? Either that's for religious or economy, or it's revolving too. It's not just one thing. We're revolving constantly through many areas in which we need to evolve, right? Religious, spirituality, economy, when it comes to our caste system, our hierarchical sort of repression, when it comes to what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a man. You see, all of that is happening. We're constantly evolving all of that. And that's what we call spiritual maturity. But we don't gain the lesson called the spiritual maturity when we tap out, right? That emotional pain, right? That emotional pain, we don't have that culture, right? When I say tap out, think of that tap out as like, when you feel like you're gonna tap out, what keeps you going? Think about it, like in a movie. It's usually the voice in the back, keep going, go get him, right? That's usually what keeps you going, right? When you think of Rocky, like, I'm about to tap out, I can't do it. This is so much emotional pain. Like, oh my God, what is this? Like, I'm tired of this. I'm sick. I'm tired. I just, I'm losing my sanity. Keep going. It's usually that voice of reason in the back, or in the front, or in the side. That's your ancestors. That's your lineage. That's your community. It's your voice of reason that keeps you from tapping out. So many of us, what happens when we do tap out and we do allow ourselves to get into we call the shame, the same, the stagnant. We basically we know many people lose themselves to that, right? The insanity. But the jump start, we talk about the jump start to any sort of spiritual maturity or emotional well-being or just emotional ease or just what we call emotional sort of freedom is creativity, right? And everything about creativity is a recreational activity, right? Everything about that. I mean, it can be done alone, right? Writing a book, creative writing, making a painting can be alone, but great sort of creativity is very much inspired by a culture. Either that's you're inspired by your art teacher, or you're inspired by something you saw outside in the park, right? Or you're inspired by something you read, or something you saw on TV, or you're inspired by this great temple and it really just whoa, something in your mind, and you all of a sudden got this great creative writing going, right? That everything we call inspiration, that's all about when we're gathering together in spirit to really free up our emotions. And then keep going, be a voice of reason, right? So that we don't have to hold on to these grievances and therefore lash out each other because our grievances are unmanaged. And when we don't have, and when we don't know how to express, articulate, and communicate to our own inner sort of, agitations or frustrations or fears or whatever that is, most likely we don't know how to speak or express, articulate with people who have the same thing. And that's where we get the disconnect, where we see this, wherever we are, geographic region-wise, we see the same pain in each other. It's just the reason we respond in this such like that kind of way sometimes, not every time, is because we're like that with ourselves. The relay of the way that we interact with our own grievance or that own sort of emotional pain is the same thing, where we're not accepting of it, of whatever that grief is, and we're not accepting of what caused it, and we are hating what caused it, but we don't understand that regardless of what it is, to make a new choice, you have to have a clear head, meaning you have to actually move on from it, right? And that's where we have these deep cultures of vengeance, right? They deep, I mean, not just we many in places deep vengeance, right? That it took a long time for us to finally make a new choice and to not make that choice, right? It took us a while to make a new choice. But with the technology age going so fast, so quickly, the yogis call this period the gracious period, from 2000 to 2000 and 2020 to 2030, the gracious period. And basically what that means is that this is a period where we have an opportunity to really get ourselves organized on how can we really be more creative and invite that into especially education, because everything environmental it has to do with education, right? That's everything about in environmentalism and humanitarianism. It has to do with education and has to do with the well-roundedness and the way we're educating and the cultural depth that is being used in our education. And that really does take an expanded perspective that can take what we know as patriarchal sort of lens as well as matriarchal lens that is not documented in sort of or not in academic sort of academic approval. You say it's not academically approved, right? These matriarchal lenses, but to be more well-rounded, right? To have that cultural depth, right? We do have to have both, right? Because we have two hemispheres of the brain. We don't just want to be functioning from one hemisphere of the brain, because what happens, you're really imbalanced, right? You need to function with both hemispheres of your brain because that's what's going on naturally. Now let's do that culturally and let's do that through or perspectively, right? So that's what environmentalism and humanitarianism is very much about education, and how we are getting smarter. And to be smart, just like dance class, if they take dance class, the teachers tell you if you don't teach them at 3 years old, and you start them, let's say, 10 or some 11, 12, it's not as deeply, you could say, it's not as easeful for somebody who starts dance at 3, right? Because again, think of that 3-year-old as think of it as that that hunt for education, right? When you're 3 years old, you're just everything about your life, everything is about a study, an education, a learning, right? And that's what environmentalism and humanitarian, the Aquarian Age and the Renaissance is about. It's about learning, and it's not about criticizing and judging, and then okay, that no, 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 no. It's about learning. Any sort of renaissance was was a breakthrough in some way, right? And was wrong in many ways, and miscalculated, and but with a clear sort of vision of what that renaissance wants and what that renaissance desires for that particular time or for the people or just for the community, really does bring about this level-headedness that is able to make a new choice and make a smarter choice, right? And that takes a learner's mind, a good learner's mind, a good learner's mind. So when we talk about the community and we talk about the culture, right? Culture is your lifestyle. It's the way that you express, you articulate. It's the way that you live your life, your spiritual practice. That's what culture is. Your spiritual practice. And it doesn't matter what that, it could be more, it could be we bow and the sunset and then the sunrise. It could be a morning sadhana. It could be you have a little altar and you pray to Buddha, right? It could be you like to recitate a mantra, or you like to take a walk, right? Take a walk around a sacred monument, whatever it is. Your spiritual practice, that is your culture, right? And that can be many things, and that's what's happening is that these cultures that we have rigidly defined as so separate and so like sort of attacking each other in our previous sort of lineage experience, we're understanding that a spiritual practice is more than just a religious. It's actually, it's about you overcoming your emotional pain, liberating your emotional pain actually, so that you can have a clear head, so that you can make new choices, so that you can be a learner's mind, not a stubborn mind, not an agitated mind, not a mind, a learner's mind, right? A youthful mind, because our mind gets calcified. It gets so calcified when we don't when we aren't creative, right? Creativity literally, it promotes neuroplasticity, right? I think of neuroplasticity as your brain is massaging, and your brain, right? When you don't massage your brain, sometimes think of those pathways in the brain where you keep making the same choice again and again. It can get calcified, meaning that it can get set. Fixed mind, right? Fixed mind. But I think of neuroplasticity as creativity promotes, as basically your mind's massage. So when your mind's massage, your body never gets stiff, right? You think of like when you stretch your body, right? Think of your body never gets stiff. Think of older people who have stiff bodies, like elders, when their body's so stiff, they look real tight, right? And they look kind of sad about that, right? Like the same thing goes with our mind. When our mind gets tight, we're not very happy about that, because we as human beings were meant to move, not just at 0 to 20, and then we start getting tight. We're meant to move, right? And how we move and how we continue to move and not get tight and uptight, and then kind of upset about that we're really tight, and just feeling uh, feeling a lack of choices, right? When you get tight, you get a lack of choices, right? Think of it, it's like dance. The more tight you get, the less moves you can do. Meaning, there's many moves you can do, right? Many jazz, hip hop, ballet. But the more tight you get, the less you can't do the choreography, right? Because there's moves you can't do because you can't move. You can't move in that way, right? And the same thing when it goes to learning in the form of education, when it comes to the form of learning a new language, or learning a new math, science, learning just a new perspective, or a new sort of history view, right? It's if you're stiff, you can't move. Your mind can't move in that way, right? And therefore, you can't get the fullness of, or you can't become more well-rounded. You can't become more well-rounded. And you get very static. There's a lot of people, they're very static. When you talk to them, they can only talk about this, that, and the other, and they can't talk about anything else because they don't know what to say. I'm like, what? I don't understand. What? I don't understand your perspective, right? Because they don't have that cultural depth or that sort of expansion in the mind, because they're tight, they're stiff. They're very, very tight because they haven't massaged their brain with a learning of many things, right? So we talk about our spiritual practice, and that being sort of the anchor, right? The rod that really brings in this healing energy, but also this clear headedness, that really the spiritual practice that also brings community together, right? When we think of religious, right? We think of religious as spiritual practice. We think of big crowds of people coming together the sunset to bow, right? Or whatever it is, to see the Buddha, or to liberate themselves. We see masses amount of people coming together to liberate themselves, right? And we think that's a form of religious. Either they're going to the synagogue, or they're going to the temple, or they're going to the church, right? They're doing that to liberate themselves, because they want to be on a creative future. They don't want to be on an emotional pain that has them reactive, and then feeling shame, right, for that. Right? So our Renaissance, called Aquarian Age, the Renaissance that we're having, is, as Yogi Bhajan has mentioned, is about creativity, courage, and character. And how we develop that, and how we always develop that, is through the learner's mind. Is through our ability to go in depth with our spiritual practice, whatever that is, but it's something that has integrity. That's what you know, right? It's something that has integrity that also expands you. So it's not just fixated on something that's not moving, or that's not evolving or revolving, or that's not bringing creativity. It's just fixed on something that has no creativity to it, no juice to creativity massaging your brain. Um, it's something, go deep. That's a spiritual practice, going deep with something that has integrity. It could be a single thing. It could just be Buddha. It could be Yogi Bhajan. It could be Jesus Christ. It could be Green Terra. It could be Mother Mary. I say these sort of figures, and I say them. It doesn't even have to be that, right? We all have this, and that's what keeps our head on straight. God, we know this, right? That's what keeps our head on straight. There's a voice of reason. We love to hear when we're in the with ourselves and we're like, you got it. That's why we get emotional. Why we cry out those tears of hate, or we let go of the vengeance, or we finally forgive ourselves for making decisions that were poor or malnourished, or that's why we decide to not blow, right, to choose nuclear bombs, because we know that voice of reason is not just we are the chosen ones, and they're lesser breed. We understand that on this planet at this time, we are very much, we are very much on this planet becoming closer into what we call more of a united genetic code. What that means is I, American, I have a genetic code, but that genetic code is connected to the Cherokees, to Germany, to Spain, to France, to Africa, to Saudi Arabia. Our genetic code is very much getting closer and closer into like a single genetic code, because we are now in conversation with each other. We've always been in conversation, but now we're actually really getting to know each other. And in the beginning of trying to get to know each other, when we talk about our different, you're Asian or whatever, you're that. And that we didn't know how to deal with that. We were like, whoa, like I don't have the maturity to deal with you're a woman and you're what? What? You're in this caste system? No, what? Right? But now we're understanding that we are moving closer and closer into what we call as like a single genetic code, regardless of what you look like, right? Just by just being here on this planet, right? And what that means is that our future, right, the creative future that we are pioneering as young generations, as we trying to really clear out these old habits, these old behaviors, to the way we react to this constant sort of temptation to do the same thing. We're really making new choices. And in that, we are potentiating ourselves into a culturally depth society. Yeah, and how that's happening is because my spiritual practice of my, the integrity that really is my rod that expands my mind in the cosmos, so I can really have a character, so I can see clearly, so I'm not bamboozled or be fooled by the fools, right? And then I also have a heart, right? We talk about that courage, so that I'm able to really stand my ground against the sort of charlatans or the aggressions, right? But I also have that creativity, so that I'm able to learn, so that if I am off, I can be able to get smarter instead of be off and then continue to be off and then intuitively, where am I? I have no idea, right? So that I can be really in a synchronicity, the divine timing with what's going on. And that's what this grace period is let's get on divine timing, like the right place at the right time, so that when this Aquarian age comes around, we already have that sort of architectural, agricultural, sorry, and institutional sort of creative new choices, that we can put in and that we've already sort of mapped out, so that when it rolls out the Aquarian age, we can just put them in. And that's what this focus of this age, this time, this decade is about. It's not about contemplating over old choices and thinking, should we make an old choice? Should we make an old choice? Should we make an old choice? What will be the consequence? What will be the future? What will be the destination if we make an old choice? What do we foresee? And then just spending that time there, and then realizing the whole time that old choice is going to lead to the same sort of um, game that we play with each other that doesn't really lead to clear-headedness or spiritual maturity, but dominance and control. It's almost, I like to say, my penis is bigger than your penis, right? And that's sometimes what we patriarchally have played with each other in especially our monarchical medieval sort of periods, right? And that has caused us to be indebted to, I mean, indebted with each other, not just indebted like economically, but we're indebted in religious and spirituality, and we're indebted in the way that we have shame, right? That we have um, towards each other, and we have to recover and resolve and mend that, and that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. So that's why this period, we're done with that. No more. We've been done, right? We know it, right? Because we, the civilians, and we, the people, we know what we must do, right? We know. We know we must get our head clear. We know we must heal out this emotional pain so that we can really start to raise our self-worth. Everything is about raise your self-worth, get your confidence, build your business, write your book. You can, all this inspiration, right? You take a painting class, take a pottering class, learn a new language, learn this, that, the other, right? How to, whatever it is, how to make a candle. There's so much of that. And we know that's the direction, because the reason we know is because that has future in it. That has future, meaning when we think of future, we think of generations of spiritual maturity. That's future, not generations of spiritual immaturity declining going deeper into it, right? So this time is where we're really going into looking at, okay, so, okay, we're in this technology age. Okay, the population in 2050 could be 10 billion. Ooh, okay, make the calculations for that, right? And really using that spiritual practice to be that rod, we can vibrate the cosmos in whatever, it would be Satnam or Buddhakadam, whatever it is. So you can get that expansion of a single a single spiritual practice of whatever it is that has that true integrity in it, right? We talk about true creativity, courage, and character. Literally vibrate all the esoteric mastery of all of them, right? God or Brahman or Buddha or Vishnu or all of them, right? And that's where the reverence comes from, when you truly are in, you have that spiritual practice or that sense of community, the sense of culture in your lineage that is you in contact with your mother and your boss and whatever it is. Whatever it is. You don't even have to speak about your culture. You don't have to marvel at you don't have to do anything. You just show up at your work or your school, and the vibration of that integrity that literally is seeping from you is going to connect with them, and it's going to highlight the culture in them, and it's going to draw out the culture in them. Again, it's whatever spiritual practice they have of inspiration, of integrity, that helps them to see clearly the cosmos, and as well as of purposeful living on planet Earth, right, for constructive, corrective, and creative sort of, potential. It's going to be ignited within them. It's going to be awakened within them. So we know that this grace period, the yogis call 2020 to 2030, is our time where we can really start to make those maps, right? We're mapping the stars already. We're mapping planet 2.0 and how we're going to get to Mars, and okay, how do we get from this galaxy to this galaxy, right? We're already mapping out that, right? We're already mapping out agendas are already mapping out our future for us, and what planet or what this nation will look like, in the relationship with them and all that kind of stuff. But we as civilians and as the community, right? We, the family, the hearth is the heart of the home, right? The community is, right, with any great philosopher, with any great teacher, with any great yogi or master, any great leader or any great shaman or any great of an individual who had a level of self-mastery in the way they express and articulate their balanced emotion. We're in a community, learning, teaching, and having that dynamic between learning and teaching from a community that they chose to, that gave them reverence. That relationship between learning and teaching, where they learn and they teach, they learn, they teach within the community, is how they were able to enrich themselves enough so to be able to share that spiritual practice with other people. And that philosophy or that ideology or that moral reason or that ethic code or that sort of visionary epiphany or whatever it is, that sort of political reform or that educational adjustment, right? All of that, it can be encouraged, and it can really come to the fullness of that through that community. And that's why, at the end of the day, community is environmentalism and humanitarianism. Community, it doesn't matter if you're black, white, it doesn't. Stripping someone's community is stripping their ways of healing themselves, and that's dangerous, because having a bunch of unhealed people who have no way of healing themselves. For example, we all have suicidal feelings because we're all connected, right? We all have the death, what is it called, the death pill that we all struggle with, right? We all have that inner death kind of feeling, like death, I just feel death, like, we all have that, regardless of where you are, where you've been, right? Because again, you may think that other person doesn't have, their whatever, white spoon with a silver spoon or white spoon, I don't know. But our genetic code is becoming more, we call it single, in the way that a lot of us have a lineage that actually, like I said, you look at my lineage and it's everywhere. Right? And there's a lot of people like that because we are voyagers. We're not only voyagers as the soul, we know that, but we are voyagers in the way that we incarnate in different regions on this planet. Because why? We want to learn, so that we're never stubborn, and so that we're never hateful, and so that we're always expansive, and so that we're always clear-headed, so that we're always compassionate, right? So that we never lose our head and then lose our heart and then just have a habit that is somebody else's habit that belongs to all those people, that the same habit that goes way back. So the community is our voice of reason. It is our God. Right? That's why it is our community that does bring about creative future, and it brings about a healthy conversation, and it brings about friction into ingenuity, because community is the place we have freedom. It's a freedom place where we can liberate, where we can be seen and heard in our rage, in our madness, but also we can show up for ourselves and to do what we need to do to balance out the scales of our own sort of internal wrestling with ourselves, so that we can actually begin to move on from the wrestling in ourselves, so that we can start to get the in spirit, right? I'm in spirit and inspire, right? The artistry, the creativity in others, to keep the continuity. We talk about light, and then there's light, and there's light. Have you seen those temples where there's just a Buddhist temple, or there's like a special, not just a Buddhist temple, but any, right, place of sacred site, and they have all these lights. Every person, and then you look at this like, my God, there's millions of lights. That's what we call the continuity of a person. They have the candlelight, and then the other, and we see that sort of imagery in movies, or in books, or in life, or we see that sort of depiction of human unity, books, literature, movies, and in real life, because it represents the continuity of one person liberating, and the voice of reason within them, the integrity within them. You don't get integrity unless you have a clear head. You can't, emotional pain, you're confused. You don't know, you can't trust yourself. You don't know if you can trust them, and you don't really like yourself, or you sort of like yourself, but you don't really feel emotionally accessible, or emotionally available, or emotionally nurtured or nourished. So when you feel that sense of integrity within your emotional body, right, that's when you become, we call, this creative sort of emotional liberator. Because liberation in any sort of religious place is about, we want to liberate the emotion, because when we get trapped in this emotional pain, that really has to do more with the physical body than the heart center. It's more of like this area, right here, this gut area, where we tend to not be able to expand, right? When we can't really massage, right, that emotion, we can't really like move, right? Let it open, right? Because when you're emotionally pain, you can't really open your body. Everything feels really tight in your body, and therefore you can't. The mind, it can't be it can't be massaged or loosened, because the mind is very much loosened and massaged by your creative movement of your physical body, right? Or by the movement in your learning. And a lot of learning that happens within the mind is about the great learning is recreational activities. Right? And that's when we learn, and that's when we best learn, and that's when we get the juices, creative brain is like, whoa, yes. Right? And that's what we're inviting into our educational system, because we are understanding that we do need new choices, and we do need children as well as adults to know that there are new choices, and that right now we may feel limited or restricted because we are still in this control and dominance, patriarchal sort of dominance, control, and this warlike behavior that is very old, and it's a very old choice. But we also need to understand that in the community where we can really collaborate and form teams and form bonds and form, we call like a tribe that can really help us to begin to express, right, or express an invention or reinvention. But a part of, we talk, the strife, right? There's a crises. There's always a crises. It's a religious crisis, and then it's an economic crisis, and it's both, and then it's ethnical, and then it's national, and then it's all this sort of crises that goes on, right? Spiritual crises, and then family crises, and everything in between, and poverty crises, where we racist crises, or whatever it is, right? It's sexist, it's discrimination, it's unfairness and imbalance in any way. How we really come into that crisis to breathe through it and find that creative solution, like going into a mysterious, esoteric house that has sort of trap doors, and you have to kind of figure it out. How we really kind of breathe into that is through that spiritual practice and that understanding that when you feel deathless, you start to feel life-giving. When you know that you're deathless, you become life-giving. So what that means is you become life-giving, or you're life-giving. When you become deathless in the feeling of your spiritual practice, you become life-giving. And the way that when you do expand your mind, you do become more well-rounded, you do start to make new choices, and you do start to realize that what is fed to you, or what is told, or what you believe, guess what? A lot of it, a little, maybe a lot, most, is not up to date, or was never accurate, or was never really a part of a natural plan, and that maybe there are agendas that are not in alignment with a natural rhythm on this planet Earth. And that's what you are here as an environmentalist, because that means you want a natural rhythm on this planet, right? A natural sort of social and economic and spiritual sort of relationship with women and men, and women and children, men with children, and nation with nation, right? And the strife, or the crises of that, we talk about the crises where everything's like shaking, and the technology age has us all kind of, what's going on, like we're all like looking to the TV, or we're looking to the news, or we're looking on social media, because we're all looking for, okay, what is going to be the inspiration of the future? What's going to be the inspiration, the new idea, or the learning experience that's going to really bring a life-giving to me, and life-giving to many? We're all looking for that. But but before we or anybody can see that in another, is that we do have to come into that healing, that spiritual practice with ourselves, so that we can be emotionally liberated, right? Because when you look at a person and you can see that, there's the radiance in them. When you look at it's a yogic science. When you look at the radiance of a person, you usually see that they have emotional maturity, meaning they're not so inclined to have these sort of reactive responses, right? Or reactive sort of strikes. They tend to be more inclined to have more responsive, in the way that it tends to be more thought out, it's more well-rounded, it tends to have more creative solution, and it tends to be more culturally, has cultural depth, and it tends to be, has a reverence, or it's revered, because it has an integrity that is rich with a community's creativity, courage, and character. And regardless of, you live in Japan, or you live in Germany, or you live in France, or you live in Australia, people can see if you have a community that has courage, creativity, and character, regardless of who that person is. If it's Yogi Bhajan, or it's Buddha, or whoever it is, you can see that. And people are sensitive. They can see. there's an imbalance, right? Within, you could say you're imbalanced in your perspective. You're not well-rounded, right? Right? We can see that because what we are now understanding as we continue to move forward, that it is your community that is behind you, or your lineage, or your ancestors, or your team, or your tribe. It's behind you. And we're understanding that that's how we're going to be able to really move forward and to push past these whatever old behaviors or habits that are like coming at us, trying to temptate us into doing making these old choices, that it's like, okay, we feel ashamed. And if we make those choices, we feel shame because we're like, same, oh man. And then there's consequences. And then you have to recover, resolve, and heal. And that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, right? So we know, we're like, no. So we're using our community as the backbone. We're using our spiritual practice, which isn't our culture. Your culture doesn't have to be your ethnicity, your sex. It doesn't have to be your nation. It doesn't have to be your religion. That's right? What is American culture? Who knows? It's definitely not the South, right? American culture is not this country music, right? That is a culture, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the culture for the whole entire thing. Every spiritual practice is an individual journey, or a family journey, or lineage journey, or community journey. That could be 4 people, could be 8 people, could be 20 people, could be 20,000 people, where it's them they're in a current, their energy, there's a conducted rod within them that's channeling in a lot of higher energy, or creative energy, or a lot of inventive or integrity, right? That raw is the backbone, really, it's a conductor of a lot of like that creative energy that they're holding within them, that they use, that conductive energy to really get them moving on, right? Moving on, right? Resolving in the creative resolutions that need to have, or the healing that needs to have, or the disconnects that need to have, or the breakthroughs that need to have, or the self-awareness that needs to have, or the sort of clear-headed that they have to have, or the vision they have to have, and the organization ability they have to have to do that, right? To move through the crises, right? To have the stamina to move through the crises, and to not lose your head, and to not pull an old choice because it's easy, right? It's easy to do that when you're reactive. It's easy to go back into an old way because it's tempting, right? It's easy to just keep doing old things, but intuitively you're not at the right place at the right time, and therefore what you're doing, what you're saying, or what's going on, it seems outdated. Whatever it is outdated. There's no sort of backbone to it. There's no sort of creative future with it. It just feels like stagnant, or just there's a lot of things that are just stagnant, or it's 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 there's no spiritual sort of maturity, or a subtle sort of awareness that's breathing into that, and and allowing, right, just allowing the natural sort of human existence, which is not whatever that kind of, we do that with ourselves, where we're just like, we just get so kind of just, in our destructive ways, right? Just let the natural sort of, the environmentalism to equalize, right? And we're so used to force because everything has always been a hammer and a nail, right? You're either the hammer or the nail, and that's the choices we've been given in the medieval period, the Romanesque, the Roman period. Everything we know is about a hammer and a nail. You're either one or the other. And it's like, you don't want to be any, but that's the only choices you have. And that's kind of the only choice. It's a hammer or a nail, and you don't want to be the nail, so you might as well be the hammer. And that's why the we're seeing more in our brain as well, the brain hemisphere balance. I'm telling you, the equalizing in the brain is happening is just naturally. Well, we are seeing the hemispheres of the brain equalizing in the way that we're beginning to cultivate a well-rounded perspective in the equalization of our brain hemisphere, just through the changes of the ages, where we are starting to have matriarchal and patriarchal sort of collaboration and some sort of innovation in the way that we are opening up new choices, in the way that we can exist, in the way that we can develop and establish, in the way that we can kind of, okay, look at things and take care of things, in the way we can make beauty in this life, so that we can be nine, as Yogi Bhajan would say, 3 to 9 seconds ahead. That's intuition. That's divine timing, right? Or 3 to 9 months, or 3 to 9 years, or 3 to 9 decades, if you really want to go into that, meditative, woo, kind of beam of, velocity of time, right? And that 3 to 9 sort of seconds, or 3 to 9 minutes, or 3 to 9 decades, it really, that intuition, it really gives you that sort of wave of energy, of inspiration on what you can be doing, right? Participating in, getting yourself involved in, it's fruitful. It bears fruit, right? It bears fruit because it's a choice. It's a new choice that creates a nuance that is a part of a natural spiritual maturity. And a lot of people, they don't think about, like, what's the spiritual maturity, or what is the maturity? Is it going down? Is it going up? Like, is it going anywhere? Right? The spiritual maturity is always moving towards a nuance that's going to get an inspiration. Right? And it's always led by what has you say that the highest integrity in the backbone of it. Because we've all been fooled and bamboozled in so many ways, and we've all known, been there, done that. But that sort of rod, the conductor rod that we all go to, right? All over the place, there's a conductor rod. It's some sacred site we go to because we're hunters of integrity. We're hunters of a single spiritual practice, a single sort of, whatever community that gives us that learner and teacher kind of dynamic, so that we can experience our creative future and what that means, and the means of that. So in the backbone of our integrity, it's creativity, courage, and character. That's something that's of inspiration. Like I said, that's of community. That can be 4 people, that can be you and your mom, that can be whatever it is that you're cultivating in your house, that's bringing about a level-headedness, that's bringing about a harmony in the way that you just naturally start to respond, in a way that brings beauty and that brings a reverence and a protection to the relay that is the relationship, a reverence and a protection, right? That kind of relay to the relationship, but also brings it brings new choices into your life, in you working with your coworkers, your boss, your jobs, your home, your travel, your money, your whatever it is, your sex, your whatever it is, it brings new choices. And those choices begin to really just enliven, right? They become life-giving to you. and you become very enthusiastic and exuberant by these new choices. Because you understand that creative future demands new choices. When all is emotional pain, that's the only thing we got, is that new choices found in the community where we can really have the therapy, the self-psychology, the awareness, the breath, the movement, the dance, the, whatever it is, the massaging of the brain through the massaging and working, liberating, stretching the body, that gets you clear. You are in environmentalism, humanitarianism in this age. And that it has no skin, it has no sex, it has no age, it has no race. It basically means you are here to create beauty. And whatever you are, whoever you are, whatever you do, you're here to create beauty. That's humanitarian environmentalist. You're here to create beauty. So create beauty and that will prevail. The beauty always prevails, right? And to create more beauty and create large areas of beauty and large environments of beauty, and make your home beautiful, make your community, your school beautiful, right? Make your park beautiful, make whatever it is beautiful, because that right there, the beauty of whatever it is, that environment that we create, that is the future of what's going to keep us healthy, happy, holy on this planet, is the beauty of this land. And that connection to making beautiful, our irrigation, agriculture, architecture, right? And the beauty of that. Your home environment, your park environment, your workforce. We're really getting into this geomancy and this feng shui, and it may seem it's not anything important politically, but it gives us this sort of, when you look at it, it gives us a new choice, and that's what this age is about. But it doesn't just float and come into, it doesn't just float into your life, right? Usually it's the inspiration that gives you a new choice. It's not it's not, if it's not beautiful, it doesn't really bring inspiration, right? It's something that is beautiful within the crises, or something that of an inspiration in the way that puts you in spirit, right? Puts you in spirit, that really gives you that freedom of emotion to express, to articulate your anger or your sadness or your great your great celebration or your great creativity, in a way that it's gonna enrich the soil. It's gonna bring nourishment to the soil, right? We're talking about nourishing ourselves. We nourish ourselves with what is beauty, because what is beauty has substance, and what is substance has depth, and what has depth is, just think of it like a piece of, like a depth that has substance, has depth, is usually something like, when we think of like a chocolate that's been around, and like cheese, or what you call cheese. When it's really authentic, it has substance, it has depth. It's not something that you just comes in. It's something that has substance, it has depth, it has reference, it's protection. And that's when we think about these ancient old trees, right? They have the greatest sort of nourishment that they offer the forest, the ecosystem. They have substance and they have depth. They've been in spirit a very long time, and they've continued to be in spirit a very long time, and continue to be in spirit a very long time. And that's what we call a yogi or a guru, and that's what we call a saint or an angel, an earth angel. That's what we call a light worker, or we call a human being who is in a spiritual practice that's participating in the flow of love, and that understands they have choices, they have new choices.